build some of this ad stack, where he was head of corporate ventures for both Publicis and also IPG. So please welcome back Tim Hanlon.
Wow, what a crowd. Thank you, Steve. I'm overwhelmed and honored by your intro and dragging me back to my agency days. And it was interesting because Michael in an earlier panel was talking about sort of being in the realm of management consulting and sort of juxtaposing that against the agency economics. And having lived on both sides of that, I can tell you, indeed, on the agency side, it is getting more not only complex, but also more stressed and compressed in terms of what that business model looks like. And frankly, I think you're seeing, and these gentlemen here on the panel will certainly speak to that, because agencies are very much either in their client base or in the mix of the people that they deal with. A lot of that stress, I think, kind of gets borne out in some of the things that you guys do for a living, and either having to help solve some of those issues or allay some of those fears, or frankly, just have to deal with it, which we'll get into sort of enmeshed. I'm going to let each of my four panelists relatively quickly introduce themselves. You're going to hear that they're all sort of from sort of differing aspects of, with opinions on the ad tech stack, what it means, what the complexities of such. There's publisher stuff in there, there's buy side in there, there's technology intermediary in there, hopefully some good representative thinking here, and then absolutely we want to hear some of your questions maybe in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. So to my immediate left, why don't we start, just introduce yourselves and maybe get a little explanation of what you do in the realm of this ad tech ecosystem, so our audience has a better understanding where, if it's not obvious already.
Great. Hello, thanks for having me. I'm Seth Demsey. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of AOL Platforms. And at AOL Platforms, if you're not familiar, we have a full stack solution for publishers and for advertisers. So, not only do we represent AOL and its inventory, but we have tens of thousands of additional publishers that we service: mobile, display, programmatic, video, all internationally. Also, we have a full data management solution, attribution solution, and a complete buy side, everything from the ad server itself all the way through the DSP. So we're sort of sitting in the middle, building platforms for publishers, building platforms for advertisers, building data and linkages between the two of them now that we're part of Verizon, activating it with that data, and then at the same time representing mega publishers like AOL and Microsoft on this set of technology.
So no complexity there, so maybe you should take a seat then, because you won't have anything to talk about. Jason, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jason Kint. I'm with Digital Content Next, DCN. We are a trade association. We represent about 70 premium publishers now. They come from offline brands, offline world that you would know, like ESPN, New York Times, Condé Nast, but then native digital companies like Vox Media here in town, Refinery 29, Business Insider. Importantly, we're the only association that's exclusively focused on the content companies. You have to be a content company to be a member. So all of our companies relevant to this discussion today, all of our brands have a direct and trusted relationship with both consumers and advertisers. It's that trust that allows us to do business. It's that trust that gets a premium in the marketplace. And it's erosion of trust that hurts us in the marketplace. So we're big believers in the future and the automation that's coming with things like programmatic and digital. At the same time, we know that without trust in there, you have an issue with intermediaries and other actors that don't have a relationship with consumers, or don't have a relationship with the advertisers, or have their best interest at heart, that erode value. And so this is right in our wheelhouse.
And playing the role of the buy side will be Mr. Chris. Go ahead.
My name's Chris Rothrock. I'm with Elmo Advertising. We're a full-service agency here in DC. I come from the perspective where I'm dealing with the vendors, DSPs, I'm dealing with publisher directs, and ultimately trying to explain everything that's going on to the client. So it's a very trying thing to do.
And we all know the economics, as we talked about earlier, so we'll get into that too. And to keep us all honest, Michael, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Michael Tiffany. I'm the co-founder and CEO of White Ops, which is a security company. And a couple years ago, White Ops discovered that cyber criminals using botnets were exploiting ad networks to make literally billions of dollars. So we have lately been working with the ad ecosystem, the sell side, to compete on quality and make guarantees of quality that ads are guaranteed to be served to humans, and with buyers to purge spending on bots from their budgets. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is prevent all of the buy side from spending money on totally bogus ad impressions so that this crime becomes unprofitable.
So why don't we start with that, Michael and Jason in particular. You guys both co-authored or multiply issued a report a few months back about some of those findings and whatnot, and arguably that's probably one of the most egregious examples of the complexity of this stack, the things that are happening somewhat nefariously, or at least somehow in the background, that most people, even in the buying and the selling process, are just either blithely unaware of or just don't know what to do about. Maybe, Jason, you can kind of front it, and maybe, Michael, you can sort of supplement with what did you guys learn, kind of some hard ones here on what the real problems are that you guys discovered around
Let me just frame in what our goal was, and I think
please.
Michael probably can most fairly describe the results. So the A&A and the advertiser side did a really incredible study a little over a year ago with White Ops, where they looked at the wider web and the issue of fraud across the wider web, and identified that there was $6.3 billion that they had identified at that time in December of 2014 of dollars being lost to bots and ad fraud. We at DCN then about 6 months later went back to White Ops. As a board, actually, our board wanted to say, all right, we're the premium publishers. Our value is built on trust in the supply chain. Let's put ourselves to the same sort of test. Let's give White Ops access to our inventory at the fullest level we can, and test our own inventory for two reasons. One, if we're actually premium publishers, we have to define what it means to be premium. And then two, it's on us and our responsibility to the wider ecosystem to share what we know we're doing right and, frankly, what we're doing wrong. And so that was the goal of what we did. And I'll turn it over to Michael if you want to go deeper.
So one of the counterintuitive things that we've learned in unwinding the ways that the bad guys make money here is that it's not just advertisers who are being harmed. I mean, it's obviously their money that's getting lit on fire, but the net effect of all of this bot traffic is to make it look like there are more people browsing on the internet than there really are, which means that it looks as though there's more inventory than there truly is. So it's an artificial oversupply of inventory, which creates downward price pressure for everybody. So if you're a clean player who's not goosing the numbers, then you're at a severe market disadvantage because you're competing with the players that are. The way that our adversaries make money, if you run a botnet, what you do is you sell the visitors by the visit. So this means that bot traffic is actually accessible to everyone. It's not necessarily just a black market kind of backroom deal. There are ways of buying traffic from third parties who will guarantee that traffic will look good in Google Analytics and with any other ad metrics company, because they prune the bot traffic and only sell the stuff that looks good. It looks like a real human. And what that means is that we find bot traffic all over the internet, on any number of websites, both large and small. And what we've learned along the way to trying to change the world here is that we have potential allies in those those premium publishers who have a real human audience but are in price competition with the guys that are faking it. And what we're trying to do is empower buyers to tell the difference. I think that the sell side literally can't afford to compete on quality if the buy side doesn't have enough intelligence to be able to tell the difference between a real guarantee and someone who's lying. So just as ultimately we purged the fraud from payment cards, and credit cards are quite successful, not by being completely fraud-free, but by having fraud levels of, say, 7 basis points. The way that was achieved was through spending across the entire ecosystem, merchant banks, payment processors, the networks themselves, sharing that burden. Right now, we're looking at losses in ad fraud of something like 1,300 basis points, so 2 orders of magnitude larger, which means that there's an awesome recapturable opportunity here. Like if we purge all of this bot traffic from the ecosystem, it's actually good for the remaining buyers, of course, and then also for the remaining sellers who are not facing that exogenous loss.
What's driving that fraudulent bot traffic in the first place? We'll talk about maybe in a couple of minutes how it sort of occurred, but why? What are the pressures? So this may be more of a Seth and a Chris question. Is it just increasing pressure by the buyers to meet numbers and meet expectations and not being able to find the success metrics that they're looking for in the more traditional path, or is it something more nefarious than that even?
I'll jump in with just something really brief that came from the study that we just published this morning, where we found that the more targeted a buy was, the more likely it was filled with bots, because as you do greater targeting against demographics, against geography, you restrict the number of people you can possibly serve an ad to, and there's a false sense of the numbers on the internet. It feels to a lot of buyers as though you can have arbitrarily narrow targeting and still reach 100 million of them, and there aren't necessarily those people. So this puts the sell side in a place where they either have to say no to the buyer, like, I'm so sorry, I can't take your money, or they need to turn the faucets on and find these extra visitors, so that they'll reach out to any third party that promises them extra visitors, and it turns out that a lot of those are really bots.
I just add, I mean, there's a massive intersection right now between the earlier discussions today, ad blocking, consumer privacy, and fraud, in that the ad tech complex, which I affectionately call it, is too complicated. It's too complicated, and so you've got 500 plus tags, ad tech vendors, many of which are good actors and are super important to our future, they're all members of the IAB, which represents many of them. They're all out there trying to get on every single web page, and it introduces complexity in the stack, so that when you're serving an ad, you've got possibly 10 different companies that are connecting hands, and often incorrectly targeting an audience and creating an opportunity for really, really, really smart people that Michael knows about and I don't even want to know about to make money.
And with that large of a daisy chain, right, Chris, right, we're talking about, it's clear that the weakest link can make it all collapse or bring leakage, right, or opportunities for unsavory players.
Yeah, I mean, bot traffic, I mean, it's huge against quality assurance. You know, we're not just looking at click-through rates anymore, you know, from buyers. I mean, we're looking one step beyond. And all those bots are doing is just jacking up those click-throughs. And, right, you know, that end KPI or ROI that we're really looking for, it's just counterproductive in the whole system.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, to your point, I think that, you know, more sophisticated measurement against actual KPIs, you know, whether you look at a click, which is probably a pretty poor proxy for something that you're actually trying to deliver in terms of business value, or you get all the way to a bespoke multi-touch attribution model, which you would hope is significantly more resilient to these types of things because you're back-ending it to, you know, real KPIs in your business. The further you can get down the measurement line and then learn as a buyer from what's working well in measurement, that's a huge thing. I think the other piece of the puzzle to what Michael said was the numbers are so immense, right? If you want to buy subcompact minivan buyers who are 18 to 34-year-old females in Topeka, Kansas, there's not 200 million of them. I'm sorry. But you expect to see it, and you expect to be able to buy them for 59-cent CPMs. So when you back all the garbage traffic out, and CPMs for a completed view of a 30-second pre-roll is $137, who balks at that number? No, I'm not paying any more than $12.50 for pre-roll.
But isn't that the trade-off, though? I mean, the ability to be able to more precisely target a finer, more understood group of supposed folks interested in a particular product or service. I mean, isn't it just a natural economics to expect that one would have to pay more for that, shall we call it, qualified reach? That's granted a much more a smaller group of people in the aggregate, but is arguably higher concentrated and more qualitatively rich, right? So, or is that because of the media buying function has all been based on scale and broad CPMs, and we can't connect those two ideas?
No, and I think that's kind of where we're at. I mean, that extra fee is, I mean, it's already here. That's something we're already paying for with an ad ops or something else. I mean, we're willing to pay that extra fee to ensure that it's the right audience and, you know, who we're trying to reach.
One other issue is that, and this came out in our findings, and I saw a glimpse of it in the report that Michael's team fabulously put out this morning, too, is that it's also about the policy. You have to buy based on the policies, the brands, and the context that they bring. When you're just trying to buy audience, ironically, it's the most valuable audience that also has the highest fraud rates. That's what I saw in this report this morning, because from a pure cookie perspective, if you think it's a likely buyer of a BMW, then there's a higher level of fraud because you're trying to simulate value. Video has a higher rate of bot traffic and fraud because it sells at a higher CPM. So if you're just trying to buy video, period, or you're just trying to buy intenders of BMWs, period, you're going to have higher issues of fraud too, because that's where the money is. If you're trying to buy that audience on the New York Times, that costs more money because you know where your money's going. You know it's going to the New York Times. You know that they're paying for high quality environment experience. And they have the policies as a company in place to make sure there's the least amount of fraud possible. And they work at it every day, and they have to even more so going forward because things are getting more complicated.
I think it gets even worse because let's say that you find exactly who you're looking for on the quality site. Then you have 2 additional layers of breakage, which are viewability and then your third-party audience measurement vendors who aren't telling you before you buy the impression if they're going to hit in target. So how many people have a 2-to-1 breakage factor on their OCR and VCE in target?
I'm going to raise my hand just
right?
for sport.
Because most people actually have more than that. You buy 2 impressions, you throw away 1. After the fact, you realize, oh, it didn't hit my target, as is said by vendor X or vendor Y, which is great. But having that breakage on top of it jacks up the CPMs, effective CPMs for in-target even more. So when you stack the variables of New York Times user who's also in the BMW audience segment, who's also a Nielsen verified male who's age X to Y, who's also in view, the pie gets really small. The expectation and your availability, your reach, and what the price volume curve looks like has to be adjusted. And what I observe is that not many people are entering digits into that little CPM box for their bidder that are going to be commensurate with what quality reach with those characteristics is actually going to cost.
It sounds like we should have been careful for what we wish for, because on the buy side, this sort of march towards third and increasingly first-party data or view of the folks that people really want to reach, and the ability to reach audiences, plural, based on their particular needs, is almost a byproduct of unbundling, say, those audiences from what was originally packaged up from a publisher's perspective in a nice sort of cone of comfort and safety that those brands basically brought those audiences to. So as those audiences have separated from, say, the media properties, are we basically at the beginnings perhaps of maybe recombining the best of those again, knowing that it's gotten so damn complex and so cost additive and frankly fraudulent ridden? How do those two ideas, the idea of more specificity with the power of media branding, right, which was the media model of yore, how do those maybe come back together again in a better way?
Yeah, I think that this is a market that's not functioning correctly because it lacks trust anchors, and putting one in place is a non-trivial problem because the internet is so awesome, partly because of the way that it's open, and all highly evolved trust systems boil down to reputation systems, and reputation systems are great because they create consequences for bad actors. However, they also create barriers to entry. So as an architect of a longer-term vision that works for everyone, we have to be cognizant of how we need to reintroduce a trust anchor into this ecosystem that allows the market to function correctly. My diagnosis of how it doesn't function correctly is that quality does not necessarily track to price. You can get robbed at low ends of the CPM scale and at very high ends of the CPM scale. And in a well-functioning market, then you would get what you pay for, if you will, right? So we need to introduce a trust anchor, but one that doesn't also skew the entire playing field in such a way that new entrants are essentially prohibited from entering it because they have no, by definition, the beginners have no reputation.
Well, it goes sort of on the premium publisher side of things, which is kind of a softball for Jason, but I guess let me just naively ask, is the answer or one of the answers more private marketplace-driven environments where, in essence, you're paying for the privilege to be inside, if you will, the walled garden of a premium publisher with lots of different, hopefully, offerings, but being able to do some of that programmatic and audience-driven stuff that at least has some guardrails around it, because you're not going out in the open market and hoping for the best with all these sort of different stack players. Is that kind of where you sort of see maybe the ad and publishing ecosystem maybe migrating back to, as more of a private label scenario?
It's definitely possible in the short term. There was when we put out our research study, there was another publication out there that asked the question of, do we need to go back to direct buys or private marketplaces? And my only pause there, frankly, is that I'm an open internet believer too, and I think it's important to our members and the future of innovation. So the small publishers, we've got a bunch of those in our membership too. The ones that don't have the big brands and the scale, they have to be able to compete too. So the beauty of the indirect system and third parties is being able to create more scale sometimes. But it's such a mess right now that I think we do have to go back to a private marketplace or more direct buying to get back to trust to build properly. Because I think your previous question was spot on, which is, ultimately that trust comes from the marketers and the consumers on both ends getting the value they expect. I'm confident that our members believe that, and that's their goal long term, to build sustainable value. But right now it's not happening across the wider web, and it's a problem. And the net result is more fraudulent activity throughout the entire ecosystem, and then consumers, on the flip side, opting out entirely from advertising. That's a significant problem that if we don't deal with in the next few years, we're going to have household brands going out of business.
So we may solve some of these stack issues and some of these improper actors, but just at the moment where consumers are completely opting out of the quote-unquote ad experience altogether, and then now the publishing industry, that's completely SOL because they don't know how to monetize. Is that fair to say?
I think that this is a defining period for the future right now, where it can either tip in the good guy's favor or tip in the bad guy's favor. Certainly, just to connect these dots, we found that private marketplaces can align incentives better, primarily by creating consequences for bad actors. But as we just showed in our study today, counterintuitively, and I think really surprisingly, private marketplaces were not fraud-free, because there are ways of gaming the system. Because of this market for new visitors, because publishers can basically buy visitors by the visit. If you know who you're being judged by, if you know essentially who is policing the private marketplace, then you can buy fake traffic that's been trained on the gatekeeper. It's been trained on the watchdog so that the watchdog doesn't work.
But Chris, you would probably admit, though, that at least in that sort of private environment, whether that's publisher-centric or maybe even something like what Rubicon is doing with Pangea, which is a multi-publisher effort in, I believe it's in Europe, where it's a like-to-like kind of scenario. At least it's one throat to choke, right?
Yeah, it's true, and it's a level of comfort too. I mean, your viewability is going to go up. I mean, you're going to have less chance of fraudulent activity, and it is one throat to choke.
Well,
you actually know which throat it is.
I'm actually not sure it is. Just to sort of throw it out there, if you've got a publisher consortium, you don't know who's buying traffic from whom. And they could be thinking that they have a PMP with 200 million impressions that they need to hit in a 30-day period. They're going to come up 15% short, so they're going to find the best traffic that they can. In good faith, they're going to go out and try to find users.
I think this is one of those lessons that...
Now it's gotten very muddy again.
I think to pull that back a bit, this is one of the lessons that was in our report, that even our members, premium publishers, when they bought traffic, which they do, and sometimes they call it marketing their content to the right places, the fraud rate in the issue was significantly lower than the wider web. And I don't know, frankly, if that's because they have such great policies in place to make sure that they buy traffic from the right people and introduce their content to the right eyeballs, or because the places that are driving them traffic are so afraid of sending bad traffic to them. But the result is it's much more legitimate traffic. So, Pangea, you mentioned it. I have no affiliation whatsoever with it, but it's the Financial Times, it's BBC, it's CNN. I damn well know where my money's going, and I know I'm going to get value back, way more than the wider web.
So a select number of throats to choke versus just one.
Lesser.
Okay. All right, so let's skate a little bit further on this. So I think we've kind of implicitly been kind of dancing around sort of digital advertising, display, that kind of stuff. But are there any worse or better scenarios in some of the other digital ad formats, such as native, such as social and mobile, such as video, and maybe someday, knock on wood, TV, which frankly, there's nobody in the TV business, I don't think, in this room, but okay. Well, nominally through certainly the AOL one.
We
and
run the largest cable operator in Australia completely for
fair enough. So you're speaking as Verizon now, but
No, actually AOL does.
okay, but Verizon certainly is a network operator. My point is, there's nobody in the TV space that even wants to hear any of this stuff, right? They don't even want to have their world even touch these issues, because TV isn't quote unquote broken. TV doesn't have these nefarious issues. It just works yet. Right. We all know that it's got to morph into something a little bit more personalized and more targeted, more data-centric. My question, besides digital display, where else, and is it more pronounced, these issues, this transparencies, the bots, the fraudulent stuff, is it more nascent in those environments because they're just more nascent? And where can we fix this stuff so that when it does start knocking on the door of TV, we don't crash and burn like perhaps some of the ecosystem is already in digital?
I can express this in one simple rule. The fraud is wherever buy-side dollars have been growing faster than the true inventory.
Say that again. So that's because
You find the fraud everywhere where buyers are moving dollars in faster than the supply is actually increasing. So for instance, even after
video,
raising the alarm in video, there has been a greater increase in spending in video than there has been in online video watching and online ad insertion, and magically the price hasn't gone up. There is only one way that can happen, and that is a bunch of fake inventory filling the gap. And we see this again and again and again in every ad format. When the buy side moves faster than the actual supply side grows, that's when the quality suffers.
Does anybody, let's expand on that a little bit. So as people fall over themselves to create video, because it is sort of the next great sort of big thing, is it a little bit easier, though, in terms of rooting out some of these issues? Because we're really talking about that,
right,
formats that are a little bit more standardized.
That's an awesome question. It feels on the internet like there's an infinite amount of inventory because anyone can start a new website and create some new content. But you don't have an advertising opportunity until you match that content with an actual visitor. And the visitors are not growing exponentially. So if you are getting a visitor for your video content, you essentially stole that visitor from someone else, unless that visitor is also brand new to the internet. And that growth is not actually commensurate with spending growth. So that's really the disconnect between what feels like an infinite amount of inventory on the internet, but the true thing you want to buy as an advertiser is a tiny slice of human attention. And it turns out that that is growing much more slowly. And so that, the bounds of that scarcity are not being defined correctly at a macro level, which is how there can be a $6-7 billion dislocation to ad fraud without anybody noticing.
I just jump in, since Michael brought up attention. I mean, he's absolutely spot on with both points in terms of supply coming in faster than the demand, the money, and attention we put out research a year and a half ago on time and attention because there is a desire to transact based on time and attention, and there's a cost per second model that's been developed. We've got several publishers that are doing this. That will matter a year from now. I guarantee it. Nielsen just 2 weeks ago announced from CES a whole new set of metrics that are based on time and attention with advertising. That's how TV is bought and sold, and it can't be manufactured. It solves a lot of problems. Right now we have a digital advertising ecosystem that 2/3 of it is bought and sold based on direct response advertising, mostly clicks. And so once you move past that, so you're like any other platform where you actually have real brand advertising and a real value to exposure, it solves a lot of our issues.
Question, on the buy side and the sell side, so maybe Chris, you can answer on the buy side. How much of an average dollar spent in digital media that you guys are placing do you think or know is being spent on stuff aside from the media, that is ad tech stuff? You have any idea on an average dollar basis?
Average dollar or percentage?
Take a dollar, is it 25 cents of each dollar? Is it 15
Yeah,
cents
I would
of each
say,
dollar? It's probably more than that, right?
yeah, I would say probably like 40 cents at least.
So 40 cents of every committed media dollar is
Yeah.
being siphoned off or spent on ad tech stuff that either is embedded in the purchase or stuff that you're doing to make certain that it's running on the right site, for example, or...
Yeah, I mean, if you take aside, ad serving, I mean, brand safety tools, data, I mean, data upon data upon data, I mean, it's needed in this time, but it all adds up. I mean, DSP costs, I mean, they take a cut.
Yeah, I kind of not sugarcoat that too. I mean, IAB, which is a very important organization, and we have members that are in the IAB, majority of the members are those companies, ad tech companies, and they put out data saying it was 55%. So I immediately say that must be low if it's 55% coming from the companies that benefit from it. And then there's a company called AdFin, which, not to give a plug, but there's out there trying to create transparency around where the value is going, and they say it could be up to 80%. So I know it's between 55 and 80%, and both those are really bad.
In the spirit of true transparency, I'm an advisor to AdFin, so nice, that was good. I like that.
I didn't know that.
Not
Transparency.
preset whatsoever. How about, so you probably see a little bit more holistically as well as on the sell side. Would you say that's the same kind of metrics or same kind of apportionment, I guess, from the publisher and sell side in terms of commitment to ad tech versus...
I'd say it's way less on the sell side.
Way less, okay.
Right.
How much less would you say?
Significantly less, probably sub 25%. Again, depending on who you are and depending on how you've structured your deals. That said, data, I think, almost needs to be excluded from the conversation, right? Because if you want to buy bulk auto intenders based on the data network, it is what it is. If you don't want to use it, don't use it, but don't say that data is part of the ad tech problem, right? So maybe there are some taxes in terms of verification here and there in other places, but nobody's putting a gun to your head to use data to segment an audience.
But it's also pretty interesting that I would argue that as compared to, say, more classic media environments such as print and television and radio, those functions of verification and all those kinds of things have almost really grown into becoming more costs of doing business than they are added taxes on the system. I mean, even if we could quibble on the numbers, the reality is that not a small chunk of change for the spend, and not a small, a still significant amount on the publisher side, is going away somewhere, right? It belies the more direct historical relationship between a buyer and a seller of media to get something done. And all these intermediaries, whether they be ad networks in the past or these other platforms, have gotten in the way and have been taking their toll and arguably straining the system. My question then is, if you believe half of that, how does it get better, right? At what point does a point solution of a point solution start to consolidate and more fully blend into a more, I guess, crisp relationship between a buyer and a seller without a whole bunch of intermediary hops along the way and opportunity for nefariousness?
I think...
Or is it great already?
No, not at all. My perspective is it only fixes itself when the marketers start to really press hard, and I think they're starting to. I think the transparency project they're working on, I think the great research they've done with White Ops, we have to remember digital's still, I think, 15% or whatever of the average CMO spend across the board. So it's getting to the point where it matters, and as TV goes wherever it goes, print is on the decline, digital becomes really, really important to them, and I think that focus will help, and that's where it has to drive from.
Any point solutions you see going away in the near term that are just kind of ready for being absorbed into other parts of things? Like, do we still need the integral ad sciences of the world when publishers arguably should be baking that into their cost?
Right, yeah, so there's a lot of aspects of verification and brand safety and these other things that are currently services that really are just about making sure that the ad that you bought actually is where you intended it to be, which feels more like a feature of data exchange, not like something you have to pay a third party for, right? So that's addressing what's actually just a fundamental flaw in the fabric of how the trades happen, more than a sustainable business service. Now, what should excite every entrepreneur, when you hear about, exogenous losses that are so big, so many people taking their cut, is that, the easiest way to make money is to make other people money. And so if there's a lot of money that's getting wasted through intermediaries, then simply cutting out those intermediaries makes someone very happy to pay you while recapturing value to either side of the transaction, right? So there's clearly a tremendous amount of improvement to be made there, but perhaps one diagnosis of the functioning of the marketplace is growth, right? So what we're talking about is increasing efficiency, and increasing efficiency usually happens once growth levels off, right? So first, what you want to do is capture growth to the greatest extent possible, and then you want to make things better once everyone's out of ideas for growth, right? So perhaps the velocity that we're enjoying just has this natural cost, which is we're also dropping a bunch of coins on the floor, and there will be just this natural evolution where we start to become more efficient once the growth primacy kind of levels off because we've hit the saturation point.
Michael, I think you're 100% right, and I think that if you look at the consolidation that's happened in the ad tech ecosystem, and I'll be completely transparent, my strategy is to have a full end-to-end system for publishers and advertisers, and you can work with anybody who you want, but darn if you can't do it all on my platform and have it be more efficient and cut your check to one person. And if I have a deal with someone like White Ops or somebody else to deal with viewability, we just take care of it for you. Now that said, if you think about our business, and if you look at, let's just talk about display. Display is, unarguably in secular decline. Where has the consolidation been happening of ad nets? Where has the consolidation been happening of platforms? It's been happening in display. Is it happening as much in mobile? Is it happening as much in video? Is it happening in television or VR? It's right. So there we go. It's exactly right. So
not
where the growth is exhausted, we're going to see consolidation. We're going to see, the types of efficiencies that you would expect in a more mature market, and the ability to package services together, bundle them for both convenience and cost efficacy together. And then where we have more innovation, more areas of unsettlement and growth, where we don't know what the standard is, we don't know what your Oculus Rift VR advertising formats are going to be. There's going to be 20,000 companies trying to figure out what's right there, and that's good.
We are just getting started. Do we have time for one question?
We have time to go to the audience.
That's what I meant. Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
And
more than one question.
There's so many other things we could get to, but we're just starting to purr now, unfortunately. Go ahead. Yeah, and then I guess John first.
Oh my gosh, I've got
have some water while you're at it there, Bob.
I've got two fantastic,
Please
totally
identify yourself.
Argumentative questions. I'm Bob Garfield from MediaPost, and I just don't even know who to offend first.
It's never
Michael,
stopped you before.
Let's start with me.
Look, I've got 3 children, any number of wives. You are my favorite person as of the last half hour. I love what you have to say, but your company is called White Ops. And that suggests there's a difference between, black ops and white ops, white hats and black hats. As I understand what I've heard today, it's not just like there's these organized criminals out there who are fomenting all this, promulgating all this fake traffic, and we've got to get them out of the system. Where are the white hats? You've described publishers who are inflating their views by buying traffic like this. Mm-hmm. You've described buyers who are trying to reach unreachable targets and absolutely knowing what they're doing, buying targeted audiences that they know don't exist. They know to a moral certainty that they're buying phony traffic, all to suit their own purposes. It reminds me of the NGOs in Kosovo who are there supposedly to stop human trafficking, and they're the ones who are going to all the brothels. Who is the good actor in all of this? Where is the white hat?
I'll make a few. I'll make a few examples out of people. So on the buy side, White Ops has been working for a long time with Walmart, which is doing the classic Walmart thing that you read case studies about when it comes to the supply chain of its products, which is they use us almost exclusively for leverage, so that they don't get down in the weeds of how to optimize their programmatic ad buying to avoid fraud. They use us to put every single one of their suppliers to account and say, you need to be better as a member of this supply chain, or we will never spend $1 with you. So they're very much using their buy-side leverage to actually improve their entire supply chain, not just for themselves, but actually for everyone. And it's very conscious. They're trying to make the world a better place for everyone, because this is a crime that at the end of the day, actually the victim is consumers. It's all of our computers that are getting broken into because this is so profitable. So it's lovely to see leadership like that that's coming from the buy side, that's basically saying, I'm going to use my buy side leverage to try to have an outsized effect on the world. And I'll make an example out of a platform as well. So the platforms are taking a differing approach to competing on quality. Right now, we've kind of sounded the alarm about this problem. We've given the whole industry a case of the do-somethings, and now I'm seeing two different modes for competing on quality. The positive example that I'll make is with Videology, which is a customer that we first encountered really quite some time ago when we found some bogus inventory on their platform, and it was a big surprise to them, and they completely flipped out about it and ultimately worked on a counter-offensive against every botnet in the world that was affecting them that took a year, and they purged all of the botnets off of their platform. And what that meant is that they took an axe to their available inventory. They literally could make less money because they developed a higher knowledge of the quality that on their platform than their buyers. In other words, they could have gotten away with it. They could have sold that inventory to someone, and they chose not to instead. And ultimately that worked out, but it was an extremely risky proposition that the CEO himself had to make because it was about actually shrinking monetizable inventory. What ultimately happened, it turns out that really premium quality publishers don't necessarily want to compete in a dirty pool, so they cut off the bogus inventory. That enabled them to onboard some killer supply deals with some name brand suppliers who are now selling through Videology. So ultimately that was good for growth, but it was an incredibly bold move. And what we're seeing instead on the part of several platforms is they now know how to segregate their platform. So if they see a White Ops customer coming who they know White Ops will flip out about certain kinds of bogus inventory, so now our customers magically don't get it. But it hasn't been purged from the platform. It's just being sold to somebody else. There's no way that we can punch through and get someone to go all the way, I think, until we have enough of a rising chorus from enough buyers who are voting with their dollars to actually.
And it's always a moving target too, unfortunately, right?
So I have another question about the ad tech tax, the invisible part. We all talk about the cuts and the margins that are being paid out to that tech supply chain, but there's also a human cost of people having workflow, manpower to integrate all that complexity. I mean, publishers now have all ad ops departments. IAB has conferences around that. I think agencies, you would know better than anyone, Tim, have built big organizations around just managing all those pieces of the stack. What does that cost?
Well, I'll possibly speak for the agency, but Chris as well. Look, I think the economics out clear, as we talked about before on the agency side. It's a very difficult grok for the agency business model to absorb what arguably is a brass tacks of ad ops experience and technologists that, frankly, are more expensive than the common agency salaried and background. And it's very hard. I think WPP has done a reasonably good job of it. The others are, in various forms trying to do the same thing. But I'm not sure that they can meet the same level of sophistication maybe as some of the publishers are, and certainly some of the tech firms. But it's certainly a challenge and a compromise, right? When it's a body business still.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you kind of hit it right on the head.
But on the supply side, maybe a little bit different. Would you argue that Jason and maybe that there's more investment on the publisher side around ad ops and the ability to absorb some of those costs and those sophistication? I see a lot of media companies hiring chief data officers all of a sudden.
Yeah, no, they've got chief data officers, chief privacy officer. Anything that touches data and automation, they've invested heavily in that area. Private marketplaces, Lab are a big member, so there's investment there that doesn't get fully factored.
If anything, I see marketers maybe wanting to bring those operations more in-house, as well as maybe relying on the publishers to actually do some of the former stuff
Can you guys
themselves.
put like a real number around it? I mean, if you've got AdFin with 80% and Lumascapes with 50% or whatever, what is the percentage of the cost to the industry of all that personnel to manage the process, aside from the money being paid out? Is it another 5, 10, 15, 20%? Back of the envelope, whatever you guys think.
I mean, I guess my question for refinement from you, would that be incremental cost of the ecosystem versus the ad ops that they would have had to have in place anyways?
The fact that we call it a stack now says there's lots of layers to it, and those are all human-based. Well,
I think the buy side is hit disproportionately hard in terms of the costs versus the sell side, which certainly has some more costs, but there's significantly more automation due to the fact that publishers are less willing to stand up bodies to do it. They've almost required more automation and integration in the tool sets, and so I don't think that they're getting hit as bad as the buy side.
I think the agency community in particular also kind of botched it with these holding company level trading desks, and now you see those largely being dismantled and rethought, especially as clients start to be much more hands-on, or at least more forceful about what their data is doing, where it's going, and how they maybe control it. So arguably you could make the argument, I think, at least in the holding company level, Michael, maybe you can back me up, that maybe they've lost a little bit of time by trying to consolidate that from one big gigantic perch. Versus having some maybe next-gen kind of solutions that are a little bit more nimble for where the world is now.
I guess back to your question, Bob, because I have to answer it. The best white hat out there is that it may seem, but the consumer is the white hat, and what we've seen right now with this ecosystem with ad blocking is absolutely watching that play out. So, I mentioned there's a correlation between ad fraud and consumer privacy and ad blocking. They're all very related. And when you've got more and more third-party tags and more third-party data being passed through an ecosystem, you end up with more fraud, you end up with less consumer privacy. We don't have an effective solution right now for consumer privacy, and you end up with ad blocking. And I think Michael would say his research shows that the more retargeting there is and the more third-party tags involved in a transaction or visiting a website, the more bot traffic you end up with. Is that right?
That's absolutely right.
Okay. The consumer.
I think that's a great way to end it, because the consumer, unfortunately not representative in this audience, but it's always a good way to end a conversation and start one. So thank you very much, guys, very much for your...
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, panel, very much.